Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coming Clean with the Dirty Dozen, the show where we put the finest explorers in your living room twice a week. My name is Aron Arngrimsson. I'm going to be your host tonight, and we have a great show for you. But before I get to our guest, I want to introduce some very special people, which we always do. They are behind the scenes. Mr. Jeff Crichton and Victoria Brown. Are you there? Hey, guys.
Hi.
How's it going?
Hello.
Well, we're
Good.
coming to the fifth episode now. Are the people in your houses getting annoyed with you yet?
Yeah, I think the bathtub restriction was quite a thing on Monday, but back to just no Netflix today.
Is the cat upset, Vic?
I think the cat's pleased of a break, to be fair.
Fair enough. So Jeff, he's in Chepstow. He's our producer and operator. He's monitoring the show from the UK, and Vic is in London. She's our producer and content creator. She's going to be taking questions from the audience in your comment section. So please remember, if you have any questions for me or Richie, you can ask them in the comment section, and she will jump in and pick some good ones.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks so much, guys. I'll see you in a bit. All right. So I bet we have a lot of new people coming in tonight, as we have a very special guest with us. But before we start the show, this Coming Clean episode, we want to talk to you about what is the Dirty Dozen and why we are doing this. So the Dirty Dozen Expedition is an expedition company, right? And normally we find ourselves in Truck Lagoon, Bikini Atoll, Galapagos, Myanmar, Chernobyl even. But obviously in this COVID-19 landscape, we are within the four walls of our home. And we decided we wanted to talk with the diving community, try and keep the spirits high, and just have some fun, really. And we're lucky that we know so many good people around the world that are on our trips. So we decided to just start inviting them on our show. And that's how Coming Clean came about. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about our guest tonight before we get him on board. So tonight we have no other than Richie Kohler joining us. So if we do a little bit of bio of Richie Kohler, if you don't know him already, his diving experiences may have begun in the waters surrounding his Brooklyn, New York roots, but for over 40 years, his passion for diving and exploring shipwrecks has taken him to all corners of the globe. Richie has explored and documented well-known shipwrecks such as the Andrea Doria, the RMS Titanic, and the HMS Britannic. But it was the identification of a World War II German submarine U-869 which catapulted his diving career into the world of television and underwater documentary filmmaking. That 6-year effort has been the subject of several television documentaries and a best-selling book, Shadow Divers by Robert Kurson. The New York Times bestseller is currently in negotiations with Netflix. Alongside his diving partner, John Chatterton, Kohler co-hosted 57 episodes of the History Channel series Deep Sea Detectives. He's performed multiple documentary specials and continues to work on underwater projects for the film and television industry. Currently, Kohler is conducting technical dive training, lecturing, and leading expeditions to explore shipwrecks worldwide. So I think without any further ado, it's time to meet Richie. Richie, where are you, buddy? Are you there somewhere?
There you are. How you doing, Aron?
I'm good, brother. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really happy to be here. Excited that we've got our upcoming expedition, and I'm also excited that it seems that at least in my neck of the world, we're getting on, I think, the other side of this pandemic, which is the reason why we're here.
That's right. I wanted to ask, where are you located for our viewers? And you're in the States, but where?
I am speaking to you from my office here at my home in Sutton, Massachusetts. And for people in Europe who may not know exactly where that is, I'm about 45 miles west of Boston, Massachusetts. So in the New England area. And I've been living here now for about 12 years.
So obviously, we've been interviewing people from all over the world, and it's been interesting to hear how lockdown is affecting them personally, what kind of measures are in place, and so on. So we thought we'd ask, how are our measures in where you are right now? What is lockdown like?
Well, as some of our viewers probably know a little bit about me, my work in shipwrecks and television is only a part-time job. My full-time job is I work in a family glass company, fixing commercial windows and doors for major chain stores throughout the United States. My area of operation is here in the New England market. And as you can imagine, we service some of the stores that are essential to stay open. One of my, one like liquor stores, but which are essential, as a matter of fact, which are essential. So cheers.
Yeah. We made it essential tonight.
Well, it's one of the ways that many people are coping with the boredom of staying home. But I don't stay home much because as a door and window company, my services are essential to keep the supermarkets, the banks, the gas stations up and running and able to take care of the public.
Excellent, and thank you for your service. So I wanted to ask you as well, how have you been entertaining yourself in the lockdown? I mean, you're used to doing expeditions all over the world, kind of on an airplane more than a full-time pilot. But being in the confines of your home and work, what do you do?
Well, fortunately, I did just move into this house. It's a brand new home that I had built, and I just moved in a couple of months ago. So fortunately, I'm taking that time to get my office decorated and, with some of the collections of things that I've picked up, like you can see behind me, through a lifetime of shipwreck diving, as well as doing some work in the basement. And, I'm a tinkerer. I love working around my home, building things, and I also have a couple of acres of land. So we've been taking the opportunity to go out and cut trails through the woods where we could ride ATVs or a gun range as well for shooting guns. So I stay busy. At the end of the day, I'm tired.
That's good. That's it. That's the way it's supposed to be. To be honest, normally I do a longer introduction. I ask some more questions, but we don't have time for that stuff tonight because we have 40 years of shipwreck diving to cover in an hour. So without any further ado, Richie, it's time for you to come clean with the Dirty Dozen. So I don't even know where to start this interview. I have quite a big list in front of me of things I need to cover, but I guess we should just start at the beginning. So tell me a little bit about what was your introduction to diving at an early age, and how old were you?
Well, I was 8 years old, and my father took scuba diving lessons, and I am the oldest child of 5 of his children. And so he took me with him, and I got to sit on the edge of that pool and watch my dad put that double hose regulator over his head and in his mouth and disappear below the surface of the pool. And I was just totally taken aback. I was totally amazed by this. At that very same time, the Apollo space program was in full bore. Yeah. And like probably every other young man and young woman around the globe, I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be an explorer. So it wasn't lost on me, this ability as a diver to be an explorer. And my father was certainly one of those type of people. There he is. And that was probably around the same time that I learned how to dive. That's the back of our family boat where he would allow me to wear his gear, put it on my back, and go in the water. And he would tie a rope around my waist so I couldn't get too far. And that was my introduction into the New York waters to scuba diving. I was 8 years old. My dad would let me dive with him for the next 5 years. And when I was 15 years old, I became a PADI junior scuba diver. I've been certified ever since. And with the exception of 2 years that are documented in the book Shadow Divers because of a personal tragedy that I was going through in my life, I've been diving every single year since.
And it's fantastic with family getting you into diving. The same thing happened to me. My father got me into diving when I was 15, and I obviously never looked back as well. So that's great. what led to your interest in wreck diving and exploring maritime history? What year? When did it all start?
Well, I don't think adventure, or in this particular case, testosterone is definitely a male component, but my sense of adventure is shared by many divers, male and female alike. And I wanted to be a little bit like my dad. My father was a fisherman, so it was a natural leap for me to become a spear fisherman. And so I would be diving for my stomach, and also the ability to get big fish, or in this particular case, lobsters. And as you can, as most of our viewers are aware, if you're going to be looking for sea life, there's no better place than either a reef, whether that reef is a man-made one, like a shipwreck, or a naturally occurring one. And in the area where I lived at that time, most of the areas that we would be fishing were shipwrecks. The seafloor around the New York, New Jersey area, although there are some rocky shoals, is mostly just sand bottom. So these shipwrecks are obviously a place where all the sea life congregate. And then, of course, people like me with a spear gun or just a net bag looking to grab some lobsters found myself drawn to these basic man-made reefs on the bottom of the ocean.
That's excellent, and that I bet many of the people watching are curious. Having said that, what was the first wreck you ever dived in?
Well, the first wreck that I can actually remember ever diving, that was a real shipwreck. And what I mean by that is when my family moved to Florida, I was diving some wrecks they didn't look any different than a coral reef because they were so broken apart and overgrown with coral. You really couldn't see anything that was indicative of being man-made. So the first real, what I want to call Hollywood shipwreck, that was intact and that had dark hallways and portholes and things that drew your attention, was an abandoned fishing boat off of Hudson, Florida. It was out in the harbor, and it would be at high tide, it would be totally underwater. And then at low tide, like the mast and a little of it would break the surface. So we knew it was there. And a buddy of mine that I had learned how to scuba dive with, we literally swam on the surface through an active boat channel to get to the shipwreck. And we went down and, it's like a beer, I think, like they say about St. Pauli girl, you never forget your first.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there I was with a little pen light. I mean, I only had a little light for looking under ledges for lobsters. I didn't have a really great light. And I think at some point, common sense, which obviously isn't that common, at least with me, won that day because I didn't go inside. I was more frightened by the fact that my light was totally swallowed up by the darkness of inside this boat. So I kind of meandered around, and believe it or not, on that dive, I got my very first artifact because it was definitely abandoned. It was definitely a shipwreck. And on the very tip of the bow was a light, a brass light. And all I had was like a little dive knife about this big, and I kind of got it under the wood, and the wood was all rotten, and I yanked it off, and I still have it to this day.
And, having said that, you've obviously been involved in a lot of TV. Oh, there you go. There it is.
That's it, man.
Excellent.
First artifact I ever got.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Very nice. So you're known as a passionate maritime storyteller. When did you realize your passion for maritime storytelling, so to speak?
Well, I think we can't let the cart get before the horse. The reality was shipwrecks were just a place for me to get lobsters and shoot fish. And that would change for me when I moved back to the New York area and started actively diving a little bit deeper, between 60 and 100 feet. And I was diving on charter boats, and I met up with a group of older, much more experienced divers that were going out to the shipwrecks every weekend. And although they would grab a lobster or a scallop, that wasn't their purpose for going to the shipwrecks. What they were doing was collecting artifacts. And I was amazed at watching them and seeing some of the things that they recovered. It was unbelievable. I mean, I would go down there and I was happy if I grabbed some lobsters and shot a fish. I didn't even see the artifacts. I didn't have the eye. I couldn't intuit where things were. And these guys were just like incredible. So when I became interested in this, they took me under their wing and started to teach me about artifact recovery, about shipwreck diving. And I want to stop right here and explain that at this time, which was the late 70s, early 80s, there was no such thing as a wreck diving class. There was no such thing as technical diving. As a matter of fact, a lot of the diving that this group was doing was beyond sport diving, frowned upon by everybody. I mean, everybody, the dive shops, the dive boat owners, the instructors, everybody was blasting this group for going beyond sport diving. In other words, diving deeper than 130 feet, doing decompression dives. And so what they did as a group was they would charter their own boat so that we could go wherever we wanted and put the people on board that were like-minded and wanted to go further and deeper. And again, this is at a time when there were no decompression computers. Everybody was diving either a single steel 72 or they would band them together. And then the aluminum 80s came out and you could band aluminum 80s together. And they didn't even have a permanent manifold. We actually had what was called suicide rigs, which would be a rig that you would use to connect to that photograph actually shows one where you can connect two tanks. And then as we started diving deeper and deeper, we would take old or we would buy used oxygen tanks from, let's say, ambulance services. We would cold drill them out so they could accept the scuba valve, and then we created pony bottles. And that third tank on the back of that rig that you're seeing right there was not used for emergencies unless it was during decompression, meaning we knew that we were going to do our deco, and if our main gas supply went low, only then would you go to your backup pony bottle, because it was only 20 cubic feet of gas, which would really not do much for you if you were at 180 feet and you went to it. Interesting enough, in this photograph, you can also see that I'm in a dry suit, which is what the divers that I was with were doing. They were changing the way that I dove, the equipment that I used, and they mentored me, which is really important. It would be years later that I would find out that over in Europe, BSAC, or the British Sub-Aqua Club, actually instilled that type of relationship between older experienced divers and newer divers, where they would mentor them. And so I was really lucky and grateful that these older, more experienced people would take me under their wing, shake me out, and help outfit me for increasingly deeper and more dangerous dives.
I have to say, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, most of us have a very humble beginning to technical diving. I remember before I met my personal mentor, I was in the Lochs of Scotland with a dry suit, a plastic harness, a steel 15-liter double cylinders with one post occupied. I mean, it was the DIR Antichrist, I can tell you that much. But that's the way it was. That's how many of us go through this. So when did you start diving on a rebreather, having said that?
Wow, that's a big jump. So I'll get you there, but I'm gonna do it in a very short story. I started diving. The epitome of technology was a steel 72.
Yeah.
Then it was an aluminum 80, and we banded them together. Then with the advent of low or high pressure 120 steel tanks with 120 cubic feet, now you had even a third more gas, bottom gas, that you could use with those tanks. But when I was diving, I think it was in 1998, I was diving with Mike and Warren Fletcher, who hosted a television program in Canada, the Sea Hunters. Clive Cussler was the sponsor. And we worked together on a project to locate and dive the first U-boat ever found in Canadian waters. And on that dive, we ran into all kinds of problems. And I realized that for me, I had reached the limit of what I could do on open circuit safely. And it was 360 feet. And I know that other people have dove deeper and that you can, but the technology was there. So in this particular case, the technology that I was looking at was the Inspiration Rebreather Classic, the one with 2 paddle handles. And I was working with other divers, one of them named John Chatterton, who had been diving it alongside of me for about 2 years. So I believe that the technology had arrived. And when that happened, I fully embraced learning a whole new way to dive, which is your seamanship, your experience is still applicable, but you have to be humble and step forward into closed circuit rebreather diving with an attitude that you're willing to start over. And you're rewarded immensely for that, as you know.
Yeah.
So for me, that change was roughly around 2001, 2002.
And like you say, what a change it makes. I mean, my shipwreck exploration personally, from going open circuit to CCR, it just changed the game completely. Let's start talking about some of your highlight wreck dives. Tell us about the Andrea Doria.
Well, I made my first dive on the Andrea Doria in 1985. And back then, you couldn't just show up with a check and say, I want to go diving. It was by invitation only. There were only 3 boats, and those 3 boat captains would have to invite you, or you would have to be highly recommended by someone those boat captains trusted. It was the only way that you could get out to go to the Andrea Doria back then. And I recall on my very first dive, I was under the tutelage of the leader of our dive group. By this time, we were no longer known as the Deep Freaks or the Crazies. We had become a chartered dive club through the Long Island Dive Association, and we had the much more respectable name of the Atlantic Wreck Divers. So as one of the youngest members of the Atlantic Wreck Divers, I was on my very first dive to the Doria. I was under the care of the leader for life, or emperor, Pete Guglieri. And the previous trip, there had been a fatality on the Doria. And so on the whole boat ride out, it was, as you can imagine, the talk of everybody on board. Absolutely. What had happened, how he had gotten, how his body was recovered, how we could avoid that same pitfall. So on my very first dive to the Andrea Doria, Pete mandated I was absolutely positively not to go inside. I was to do a touch and go dive. I was supposed to go down to the wreck with him, touch the hull, which I believe was at about 190, maybe 195 on air, swim around, look at those lifeboat davits, the promenade deck, and just get a feel for what it was, because we bring to these moments in our diving career all of our fears, especially as a young person. I was 24 years old at the time. And so I felt, although my experience level was commensurate as a diver, my maturity, I think, as a man wasn't. And so I was very, very scared. So scared that it was almost difficult for me to muster enough spit to clear my mask. But I knew that, Pete wouldn't let me go, and he was going to be right there beside me and look out for me. And so after that dive, like any other epic event in your life, it became easier with each dive. Yeah. And the next dive after that, I went inside with him, and we did recover some bits and pieces of crockery. And you must realize that at that time, and to some people even still, the Mount Everest was considered, the Andrea Doria was considered the Mount Everest of shipwreck diving. I mean, there was nothing bigger, badder, and its reputation for having diving fatalities, I think, also made that reputation even more sinister, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you were saying before, the anticipation before a challenging wreck dive, you can almost cut the tension with a knife in the air. It's wow, I have many memories about that, which it kind of is part of the thrill, to be honest with you.
Difficult to sleep on the boat ride out, the whole thing. It's like, I like to consider it more nervous energy than fear.
Yeah, fear is healthy.
Of course it is. And one of the things that I like to tell anyone about your level of experience is, if you're not afraid, then you're probably cocky or arrogant. You should always have a small bit of fear, but that fear should be making sure that you've done all your checks and balances. Absolutely. If you're so afraid that you're literally shaking, then something's not in balance. Either you don't have the commensurate experience, the requisite training, you're not ready. So fear keeps us from doing really stupid things sometimes, like when I was younger and not going in that shipwreck when I wasn't adequately trained or equipped.
Another thing I wanted to touch on, since you talked about the fatalities a little bit, the human connection you get with wreck diving. I can just very shortly say, when we were diving the Alexander Hamilton, obviously we put the memorial plaque for the 25 servicemen that are still on board. And to this day, 9 years, it's still going on, speaking with the families and the rest of it. And it's very heartwarming, which brings a whole new level to wreck diving itself, for me personally. Who have you connected with in connection with Andrea Doria, and how the families reacted?
Well, when John Chatterton and I were working for the History Channel, one of the things that we were able to do was actually reach out and become in contact with some of the survivors. And one of them wanted us to bring a memorial that had some of his relatives' ashes, as well as a rosary and some other things, and inter that into the Andrea Doria. So John and I went down and we put this inside, so that in a way there could be a connection between the family that had survived and the family member that had been lost. And I think that was, one of the only times for me that I was able to make a connection with families and survivors from the Andrea Doria.
As far as to my knowledge, I think you've done 124 dives to the Andrea Doria. Will you dive the wreck again?
The last time I was there was in 2009, so it's been quite a while. But I've been busy doing other things, as you know. So when people ask me, like, why did you dive it so much? One of the reasons was that at the time I just really loved collecting bits and pieces of memorabilia, artifacts, if you would, from the shipwreck. The Andrea Doria was one of the last passenger liners that still had a class system: first class, second class, third class. And in that, the crockery, the china, the silverware was different if you were a first class customer or second class. So, as divers, we would go to the first class bar, the second class restaurant, all these different places, and pick up these tidbits. And I loved collecting this crockery. To this day, there's just something so unusual about seeing a big burly guy wearing 200 pounds of life support equipment holding a dainty teacup in their hand. It's like, but I'm that guy. I'm that guy. That's
it's what turns us on, So yeah, having said that, and before we jump into all the other things we want to cover, I think it's time to ask, to let the audience ask you a few questions. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, sure.
Vic, are you there somewhere? There she is. How's it going?
Yeah, guys. Thanks. Hey, Richie. Hey, Aaron. Super active on the social comments tonight. Lots of love here for you, Richie. Timothy Scott's asking, he's curious as to what resources you used pre-internet to research the wrecks you explored during Shipwreck Detectives. He says you had access to historians with documentation. Did you reach out to the historians, or did you learn about the wrecks as you were diving?
That's a really great question. In the pre-internet times, what we used to do would be go to our primary archival research would be books that had been written by historians about shipwrecks of New York, New Jersey, and some of them weren't written by divers for divers. They were just shipwreck stories. And so in that, they didn't have latitude and longitude, they didn't have location, but they had the story. And so if that was a starting point, from there you can go to a local mariner museum, and many seaside communities here in the United States will have a small local museum that'll be dedicated to life-saving. You know, when ships would come ashore and lifesavers, Coast Guard would go out to rescue the sailors and crew. And so that would be another place where we could go and find research. And then, of course, probably for us in the United States, one of the best resources for shipwrecks of the periods during World War I and World War II would be the National Archives, which is located primarily in Washington, D.C., but also in the Maryland area. So if you knew, let's just say, that you wanted to research the USS Victoria, we're going to name it after you then, you would then go to the archives and you would ask for the help of an archivist, and they would start culling the resources available. And it was up to you now to spend hours and hours going through all of these documents and photographs until you found something that could help.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Richie. I'm going to merge a question here from Jeff Pack, Joe from Divesoft, hello, and PJ. The questions are remarkably similar. They're curious about what it's like to dive on the Andrea Doria today, and do you still believe it's the Mount Everest of diving?
Well, again, I was there in 2009, and she's a far cry from the Grande Dame, which was her nickname, the Grande Dame of the Atlantic, that she was in 1956 when she sank. She's also a far cry from the shipwreck that I dove in 1985 on my first dive. And the reason for that is that all of the upper decks from the hull up have now collapsed and fallen away. So all of the bars, the restaurants, the gift shop, the Bank of Rome, all of those accommodations that were above the weather deck have now fallen away. So they only exist in photographs, the artifacts that I've recovered and other divers have recovered, and in my memories. Is it still an epic dive? I think it is. I think that it is still definitely for people that love diving into history. And I'm sorry if that sounds like I'm being glib, but the reality is when you are diving a shipwreck, you're literally immersing yourself into history. And so if you go there with just a sense of adventure, then that's one thing. But if you go there having read the stories, having looked at the images of the people that were the players, if they're, in the case of the Andrea Doria, you can actually see video of it sinking, images and video of the Stockholm returning. You can get caught up in the emotion of this event and it becomes part of you. So yes, the Andrea Doria was an epic moment in shipwreck history here in the United States. So it is really a great dive, but it is a remarkably different dive for the diver than when I dove it, because you'll never get to see those things that I did. So I don't know if and the final note on that, I wouldn't consider it any more the Mount Everest, but it's certainly quite a mountain in itself.
Great, Richie. Thanks very much. I'll see you guys shortly.
All right. The questions are even mounting still, so we'll have time to answer plenty of questions later, guys, so no worries. I want to crack on. Let's get into shadow divers. So 1991 to 1996, with partner John Chatterton, you positively identified an unknown German U-boat wreck, appropriately nicknamed the UWHO, located off the New Jersey coast as the U-869. How did you catch wind of this mystery sub?
Okay. Well, at that time, a boat captain named Bill Nagel was going out and looking for new shipwrecks. Bill Nagel was a legend in his own right. He had bought a Maine coaster, a smaller boat, called it the Seeker. And while diving off that boat, he had recovered the first bell from the Andrea Doria, which was an incredible achievement, diving on air back then. And then would ultimately build a larger vessel called the Seeker, much bigger, and used that vessel not only to go to the Andrea Doria, but more importantly, to look for virgin shipwrecks. And on one of those expeditions, he had stumbled on what was truly an enigma. He had stumbled on a World War II German submarine that no government, not the American government, not the German government, no historian, no naval expert could answer the simple question, what U-boat is this and how did it wind up off the coast of New Jersey? At that time, there was absolutely no records to be located of a German U-boat that had been sunk or attacked in that area. So it fell upon the dive team to go out there and try and figure this out. One of the things that I noticed and was painfully obvious to the divers who would go inside, and I can't hesitate to tell you how difficult it was to dive to 230 feet and then enter this broken sub. When we first found it, we were still diving air. Nobody was diving rebreathers. Nobody was diving trimix. We were just diving air. Yes, so you're hammered. Yeah, you're hammered out of your gourd on narcosis. And the first thing that you see when you go into the forward compartment was a veritable boneyard. I mean, the crew was still aboard. And unlike the Andrea Doria, where there had been over 50 fatalities, we don't see them. We don't see the human remains. But in the anaerobic and stagnant water of the submarine, they are right where they fell, and in some cases still in their tattered uniform. You can see the bones sticking out. So it was a very sobering realization for me, especially being hammered under narcosis, to come to grips with my own morality and my own mortality. And I knew that if we didn't do something and if we didn't do it right, no one else would. In the beginning, I thought that the U.S. Navy, I think many of the divers thought the U.S. Navy was just going to show up and shoo us off. Go away, you little guys. We're going to take care of this.
Yeah, right.
And put Navy divers down and figure this out, but they didn't. And it became obvious to me that honestly, nobody really cared about these guys. Nobody cared about them. And I knew that somewhere in Germany, there was a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister, maybe even a mother or father that did not know what happened to their loved one.
Yeah.
And so where John Chatterton had taken this as a very personal thing about his abilities as a technical diver or as a shipwreck researcher, the wreck was beating him. So for him, it was, I believe, that he needed to finish this. He needed to solve this mystery. The idea that someone could solve it just swimming by and with an accidental fin kick turn something over that would identify blew his mind. It just blew his mind. But to know John, you have to understand he always has a plan. He dives his plan. He's very well thought about how he approaches things. And for me, it was a little bit different. It was about a sense of obligation to these bones. Now, I got to tell you, I recognize that, in 1945, these guys were the enemy. They were Nazis. They were the enemy. Yeah. And if I was in the Navy, I would have sank them. But that's not the case. This is 1991, and what they are unknown young people that nobody seems to care about. And if we didn't do something, then they'd still be out there and no one would know who they were.
It's simply just a fascinating story. And this obviously led to you guys making the 2-hour epic Hitler's Lost Sub, which is an Emmy Award-winning documentary. Yep. It's available on Nova and Amazon Prime, guys, if you wanna watch it. I was actually literally just before this episode watching Amazon, and there was The Man in the High Castle. Have you seen that?
I have, but I want to just interject one other thing. John and I are the subject of Rob Kerson's book, and that's because Rob Kerson focused on us because John was there from the very beginning, and I came in on the third dive there, and I was on that third dive in the water with John when he found the dishes that positively identified this as a World War II Nazi submarine. I mean, right on the back of the dish, you could see the eagle and swastika in the year 1942. But there were many divers that worked with us throughout, and they are in the book Shadow Divers. They're there. They were part of the story. But I think Rob Person focused on John and I because of the dynamics of our relationship. I mean, we didn't even like each other when this story began. We were not friends. I wouldn't say we were enemies, but we weren't friendly. And so we became friends during the course of this. And over 6 years, 3 people lost their lives. I mean, technically in 2 years, there were 3 fatalities, which at that time was a worse death rate than even the Doria. And many boat captains didn't want to go back to that wreck anymore because they were afraid, because of the depth, that this wreck was, and I quote the late Captain George Hoffman, that wreck is going to eat divers. That's what he said. And it's tragic to think that Captain Hoffman was right and that there was tragically 3 fatalities. So there were other divers. There were 2 other divers that were part of the bucket brigade, if you will, and it's in the book, where we were ultimately able to find a box, and John had to do a risky maneuver and then pass that out to me. And there was John Yerga and Pat Rooney were the other 2 divers that really were there and helped make this happen. So
that's fantastic. I think we could do an entire episode just about shadow divers, really. But I think we're actually past halfway, and the questions are simply flooding in. So I think it might be time to go into Vic again, maybe ask a few questions, and then carry on to the next topic. Vic, are you there?
Hello. Hi, guys. Yeah, got lots more questions. So let's start with David. David Street. Please ask Richie if there's a wreck on his bucket list that he has not dived yet.
Yes, and hi, Dave. How you doing down in Australia, mate? No, that's Strikey. This is Dave Street. He's in the UK. I got my Davids mixed up for a minute there. That's what happens when you're drinking. Yeah, Dave. I definitely Bikini Atoll, which is I'm going to with Aron, and I think we got a spot. So if you want, talk to Aron later. So Bikini Atoll is definitely on my list. But I don't think I have a bucket list. I like to think that, my life is kind of dynamic, and I've been incredibly fortunate. I do believe we make our own luck. So when somebody asks me, hey, what's the next wreck you want to dive, or where are you going? I always say the next one. I don't like prioritize. I love looking for virgin shipwrecks. So to me, the concept of diving into the unknown, not knowing what you're going to find, going after what we call a mark, it's just a bump on the bottom and you're pulling yourself down the anchor line. That is by far the most exciting thing I can do diving.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Quick one from John. He's asking, are the Atlantic Wreck Divers crews still together and active?
Over half of them have retired from diving. Tragically, one of them, Dennis Kessler, has passed away, not in a diving accident. So we are less one in number. I think 4 of them have just pretty much given up on diving for now. They haven't been in the water, to the best of my knowledge, in years. The rest of the group are still doing incredible stuff. There's some of the guys down in New Jersey that have been working and finding and identifying shipwrecks down that part of the way. Pat Rooney in Long Island has been doing some incredible stuff, and recently with a couple of the other members of the Atlantic Wreck Divers, they went out and found a U-boat off of Nantucket, Nantucket, Massachusetts. So they're really all out there. Everybody's just doing what we've been doing for years, and they still have find time to go out and have a good time, and never forget that diving is about people and enjoying yourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
I'll leave you guys for now. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Vic. Okay, so I have a bit of a segue here for us, and a bit of a story that I want you to tell us, because you kind of are following in the footsteps of Violet Jessop. What a story that's there. I'm not sure all of our viewers know who this person is, but I think it's an excellent way to start talking about our next subject. So tell us, Richie, who is Violet Jessop?
Well, Violet Jessop was a young Irish immigrant who, with her family, with her mother and father as a young child, moved to South America, where her father wanted to provide a better life as a sheep farmer. But he was doing it where he was like an indentured servant, so that he had to earn his way to get his own farm, like a sharecropper, if you will. Unfortunately for Violet and her family, her father was stricken with tuberculosis and died. And with no means of supporting the family, they had to leave. They were incapable. A woman with small children was incapable of running a sheep farm, so therefore they had to return to the United Kingdom. But they had sold their house or their possessions, and they had no more family in Ireland, so they moved to England, London, England, where Violet's mother, in order to support her family, became a stewardess on board a ship, basically, and until she became sick with tuberculosis, in which the children would then all put into orphanages. And the mother was still alive and trying to get her family back together, but being sick and without a welfare and without a job, it was incredibly difficult. Young Violet, as the oldest child, a lot fell on her. And it's a lot to be said about this young girl, because at a time when young women were never encouraged or even allowed in some cases to go to higher learning beyond elementary school, the nuns in the orphanage all gathered money to send Violet to a high school. So this must speak volumes about the determination of this young lady.
Jeff, do we have a photo of Violet somewhere? Sorry, don't interrupt.
When she was old enough, she followed in her mother's footsteps and became a stewardess on board a ship, because that was a way that a young woman with otherwise not many opportunities can make a pretty decent living. And so Violet became really good at it. One of her jobs was as a stewardess on board the White Star Line's newest ship called the Olympic. Now, the Olympic was unique in its construction and design. It was, at the time that it was built, one of the largest liners in the world. And she was one of 3 ships that would become known as the Olympians after her design. Most people know her second sister, Titanic, and then her third, and probably also not as well known, sister, Britannic. So these 3 ships were known as the Olympians. And Violet Jessop has an incredible relationship with these ships, which seems to defy logic and seem like it was something where truth is often stranger than fiction. So this young girl with this tragic backstory winds up getting a job on board Olympic, and she's a stewardess. She's on board Olympic when there's an accident in which a British warship called the Hawk is drawn into the side by the propellers on Olympic, and the bow of it crashes into the engine room, piercing the hull. And the engine room is flooding, and they close the watertight doors, and the Olympic is saved. And some people say that this is where the reputation of the Olympians as unsinkable comes from this incident. Well, Violet Jessop does such a good job on board the Olympic. She is now promoted to a first-class stewardess. And this is really saying something for a young woman to get such a coveted position where she is literally going to be taking care of the John Jacob Astors, the most wealthiest, the Isidore Strauss. These are the people that would be her clients. So you think about that. And so she has this opportunity to silently rub elbows, because, you know, a good servant is seen, not heard. And she's on board Titanic on her maiden voyage as a first-class stewardess. And probably even more amazingly, she gets the opportunity to get off the ship, where 1,500 other people did not. So Violet Jessop finds herself in one of the lifeboats that's being lowered. And as the lifeboat's going down, a woman rushes from the crowd and thrusts a small infant child into Violet's arms, wordlessly, doesn't say anything. The boat keeps going down and gets in the water, and now Violet's in the lifeboat holding this child as the lifeboat rows away. She's there that night. She's watching Titanic raise up and then break in half and sink below the Atlantic. She listens that evening to the 1,500 people screaming in the water until slowly they all become silent. And she, like everyone else, realizes that she just witnessed the death of 1,500 people. The next morning, as the sun comes up, Carpathia, the rescue ship, comes into the area of the disaster and starts gathering up the lifeboats with the pitiful few survivors. And Violet Jessop is brought aboard Carpathia, still holding this infant, when out of the crowd, miraculously, this woman grabs the child and then disappears into the crowd. Again, Violet never knew the child's name, didn't even know the child's sex, didn't know the person, nothing. And before we're harsh to criticize this woman for not saying anything, it's quite possible that she was an immigrant who did not even know how to speak English. Yep. Because, the bulk of the people on board Titanic were immigrants coming from the old world to the new. And so when Violet finally lands in New York, she's not only literally penniless, everything that she owned, all her possessions, all her money, everything is at the bottom of the Atlantic with the Titanic. Out of the goodness of their heart, the White Star Line offers her and all of the other crew free passage back to the United Kingdom, where they're all promptly fired because now they have no ship, they have no job. So she kind of struggles with a couple of other jobs for a while. And then when World War I comes about, like many other patriotic young people, she volunteers to help her country in a time of war. She volunteers for what's called the VAD, or the Volunteer Army Detachment, which is basically nurses. And she is going to become a nurse and help the wounded soldiers. When they interview her and find out a little bit about her resume, they realize that she had worked as a stewardess on board a ship. So she's assigned to the largest and newest hospital ship in the British Navy, which is none other than the requisitioned sister ship of the Titanic, the HMS Britannic. So Violet Jessop is now walking on the deck of the third Olympian, and that's a picture of Violet right there. Quite an attractive young woman. Yeah. When you think about it had to go through her mind that she was, to the best of our knowledge, she's the only woman. There's been two other men that have been known to have been on all three ships, but she's the only woman that has ever served, to the best of anyone's knowledge, on board all three of the Olympians. And she was there during the 6th mission of mercy, when the Britannic was bringing home wounded from the front, from the Dardanelles. She was on her way back to pick up another load of wounded when there was a mysterious explosion, and the Britannic went to the bottom of the Aegean 3 times faster than the Titanic. Well, you could say the old fool me once, fool me twice. You're not going to fool me 3 times, because this time,
must be getting tired of this now.
Violet did not waste any time. When the explosion occurred, she went back to her cabin. She gathered up all her possessions, put everything she owned, including a winter coat. By the way, this is Athens, Greece, where it's actually quite warm in November. Right. She put on a heavy winter coat. She put on her life jacket over that, and she makes her way to the lifeboat deck. And when she's up on the lifeboat deck, there's a bit of a panic, and 3 lifeboats are launched before the captain had given the abandoned ship order. And what they either were not realizing or they didn't care was that the ship was still making way. It was still going through the water. Not only was it still making way and going through the water, but the ship had started to list or lean to one side, and one of the propellers, the port side propeller, was out of the water. So as these lifeboats were dropped down, they were almost immediately drawn into the propeller, and the people inside that couldn't get out quick enough, the lifeboats and the people were just chopped to pieces. Well, in that third lifeboat was Violet Jessop. Wow. And if you want to know what happened, I know a really good book where you could find out exactly if she made it or not.
And what book is that, Richie?
It would happen to be The Mystery of the Last Olympian, written by me.
And also available on Amazon, I guess.
That is true.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that story. It's fascinating.
Not a problem.
And
a shameless plug.
Hey, we all got to do this. So in 2005, you were with the History Channel's History Channel for an award-winning documentary where you went to the RMS Titanic, documenting new evidence and the wreckage itself. This is one of the most infamous sinking stories in the world. And I want to ask you personally, how did you feel when your eyes first set on the Titanic?
You know, at that time, I had been working for the History Channel for about 3, maybe 4 years. And we had literally been around the world. We had been diving, you name it, caves, shipwrecks, planes in lakes, Great Lakes. We had been every submarines, everything. We've been diving everything. And so when David Kincannon came to John Chatterton and I with this incredible opportunity and with a story, with an idea, we pitched the idea to the History Channel. They loved it until they heard the price tag. They balked at it. And so, who would John and Richie be if we would have let an opportunity to go to Titanic pass and not jump at it? So we mortgaged our homes. We shook the couch, got every nickel we could, and we brought in a partner who was a producer named Kirk Wolfinger from Maine. The three of us were equal partners. We chartered to Keldysh. We basically the most expensive wreck charter that you've ever heard of in your life. Well, over $250,000. So, but we went out there. We pursued David's evidence. We found incredible large sections of the hull, which some experts say change the way that we look at the sinking of Titanic, because they define the breakup as happening before the sinking. And in other words, most people had thought that Titanic started to sink and then she broke.
Yep.
It's actually different. What happened was she was sinking, and it was sinking slowly, but then she broke at the bottom and then sank rapidly. So she wasn't really a shipwreck until these pieces broke. And if the hull had stayed together longer, there's a possibility that she may have stayed afloat long enough for Carpathia to get there, for the lifeboats to have been recalled and more people loaded into them. You can go on and on with the coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Sure.
But the reality is I had really done my homework about what it would be like to dive in the Mears. I thought about, I studied everything that I could from Dr. Ballard's expeditions to Titanic, so that when I would get down there, I could hopefully contribute. That was the whole point. It was not to be a tourist, but to contribute to the knowledge and the experience of what's to be learned from Titanic. And I got to tell you, 2.5 miles down, it takes over 2.5 hours to descend in the Mears submersibles. With me was cinematographer Ralph White, the late Ralph White. What a great man. What a great underwater explorer. We should talk about him someday in more detail. And it was just awe-inspiring. I had thought that I would be scripted. I thought that when I first looked out that port and I saw the wreck of Titanic, I would be dynamic and be so creative and poetic with my words, but I could just simply say, I can't believe it. I mean, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. For a guy who's been studying and loving shipwreck diving, to see that iconic bow shot come into the lights, just stay with me for the rest of my life.
I honestly can't imagine how you must have felt. That must have been an astonishing experience. Only a year later, you went to the Britannic on another expedition for the History Channel. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the reason why we went to Britannic was because when the engineers looked at these pieces of the missing bottom, the double hull, they started to come up with a theory that maybe these expansion joints are the thing that broke the ship in two. Kind of like how when you're opening up a bag of crisps, there's usually a little indent in the plastic that helps tear it. Well, they were thinking that the expansion joint in the ship is actually the point where the ship broke into two. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to look at a similar ship, and where else could we go but her sister ship, which is Britannic, which is only in 400 feet of water in the Aegean, and unlike Titanic, where you need a submersible, it's 2.5 miles down, it's an incredibly expensive expedition. We could spend a lot more time and get the answers that we needed by exploring her sister ship. So when I went there in 2006, I put together a team. John Chatterton and I put together a team of some of the most experienced wreck divers that we knew that would help us achieve what it was that we needed to do, which was to image the shipwreck, to get inside and take photographs and try and not only solve questions about Titanic, but also at the same time try to answer questions about Britannic and why she sank 3 times quicker.
So I want to get a little bit personal here about the Britannic, because you suffered a loss of a dear friend on the Britannic, Carl Spencer. Tell us a little bit about that.
When I first went to Britannic in 2006, I mentioned that we had put together a team of some of the most experienced wreck divers, and 2 of them that we had asked to join us were veterans of Britannic expeditions, and one of them, Carl Spencer, had been a leader of a prior expedition. So we were padding the field, if you will, with technical expertise, not only about the diving that we would expect to be doing, but about the logistics, because diving Britannic at that time was an incredible logistical nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
So having done it before, Carl Spencer and Lee Bishop were the perfect additions to our team. And in that, they also brought Edoardo Pavia from Italy, who came to our rescue when a lot of the equipment that we had rented from the Greek diving organizations wound up being literally useless. So at that moment, I got to meet some of the best wreck divers in the world who would really help facilitate not only that particular expedition in 2006, but other expeditions. And of course, we had become fast friends. If you jump ahead 4 years later, in 2009, I get a phone call from Carl Spencer inviting me to join him as what he calls a member of his dream team. He was putting together some of the best divers in the world to work with Dr. Bob Ballard, who was the man who was the original person to have found Titanic, and to be doing a discovery, I think it was a National Geographic program that was going to tell the story of Titanic and Britannic concurrently. And Carl Spencer would be leading his dive team on Britannic, and of course, the head of the entire thing would have been Dr. Bob Ballard. And well, I have to tell you right there, I was just incredibly honored that Carl, who was one of the most kindest and smartest, soft-spoken, self-effacing guys. He would describe himself as just a plumber, but he was far from just a plumber. I mean, his list of not only diving but film expeditions was already long and quite experienced, and he was just an incredible guy. Safety was always paramount on every expedition. And he did everything bigger. I mean, he had rented or worked out a deal with the Commandant for Colt, which was like a 250-foot ex-German minesweeper. We were going to be using submersibles and ROVs. It was an incredible undertaking. And it was on the 5th day of diving operations when Carl made his first dive of the expedition. I was in the water with Richie Stevenson. Edoardo Pavia was one of the safety divers. and Carl was diving with Evan Kovacs. I believe Lee Bishop was also in the water with Pete Mesley. And for some reason, during the course of the dive, Carl decided that his rebreather wasn't functioning correctly, and he bailed out. And at this point, I believe he was in the Marconi radio room, and so he was probably at about 385 feet when he decided to bail off his rebreather. He signaled Evan, and at that point, everything went correctly to plan for an emergency bailout scenario. Evan Kovacs shot a marker buoy indicating we had a diver on open circuit. It hit the surface. The dive team deployed one of the rescue divers, or excuse me, support divers, into the water, carrying more gas to meet them. At no point was there ever a chance that Carl would run out of an adequate supply of breathing gas, because we not only had enough within the dive team, but we had emergency gas brought to him. And so he did all of his decompression to about 150 feet. And there at the junction of a line was a small yellow cylinder that was marked air. And at this point, Carl was signaling to the divers he was with that he either had a headache or he was indicating that he had made a mistake. It's hard to understand what his hand signal was intended to mean, but he was banging his head like this. And he then opted to go to breathe from this small tank of air. And for our viewers that aren't technical divers or may not have heard the story, air is not one of the things we as technical divers would use as a decompression gas. We would use nitrox, we would use heliox, we use trimix, we use pure oxygen, but we don't use air. We're not going to introduce that into the breathing mix at 150 feet. This tank wasn't part of our bailout plan. It was a tank that was placed there by Carl himself because he had been planning on using it on a dive to recover scientific equipment by filling lift bags with it. So that tank was just to be used to fill lifting bags to send science experiments up. Within a few moments of breathing on that tank, Carl started to convulse. And in a moment that is both incredibly saddening and terrifying for me, the divers that he was with had to make a decision. And I don't envy their decision. Their decision was to do nothing or to send him to the surface with at least 3 or 4 hours of decompression ahead of him. And so we did have a decompression chamber on board. We had hyperbaric surgeons on board the ship. When he came to the surface, Eduardo Pavia grabbed him and brought him to the ship. And they had started resuscitation efforts on him, and he was flown by Hellenic Navy helicopter. They didn't want to put him in the chamber on board the ship because he had not regained consciousness. And despite the efforts of everybody, Carl Spencer never regained consciousness and died, and tragically became the first person to die diving the Britannic.
And wreck diving has inherent risks, and maybe the worst part about when accidents like this happen is you do develop very deep friendships when you're wreck diving. Absolutely, like you said, they become like family when you do these expeditions together. So yeah, rest in peace. And I'm obviously sorry for your loss, Richie, but I thought it was a story that the viewers would want to know about. It's important.
And it's important to know that we must learn from these things. And subsequently, we tested that cylinder, and it didn't have air in it. It had 50% nitrox. And for those of our viewers who don't understand, 50% nitrox at 150 feet put Carl into hyperoxic oxygen toxicity seizure. And that was the cause. If he had never breathed from that tank, he would have most likely had an uneventful but...
Oh, I think Richie might have dropped out. Jeff, are you there in tech support? Vic, are you there somewhere?
We've temporarily lost him.
Well, luckily we have an invite link, so I'm sure we can get him back in. Hey guys, there had to come a time on live TV where we have some technical issues. I guess in the meantime, while we get Richie on board, I can see if I can find some questions I can answer. Hey Menno, how are you doing? Hey Jeff, I can see you giving him some grief. Let's see, Last Olympian. Thanks for all the nice comments, guys. I have to say it's always been a pleasure doing these broadcasts for you. We're very happy to see how engaged the community is and how much you're enjoying the series. So it definitely drives us moving forward. I think we're doing a show on Monday, and then after that we're going to take a break for a week and polish some things, and then carry on from there for a full season. Let's see if there's any other questions here in the comment section. Maybe his iPad battery ran out. It could be. Let's see. He is coming back. Thanks for waiting, everyone. I want to see if I can entertain you in the meantime. Let's see. Is there anything else? Thanks for the comment, Jeff. Yeah, we're really glad to you're enjoying the shows. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Oh, there he is again.
I was here the whole time.
What happened?
I was listening to you.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know.
Yeah, I mean these broadcasts.
Or maybe I wanted to get another beer.
Yeah, there you go. You put me on the spot. Now these streaming services are loaded usually on Thursday evenings, so it might have been a technical glitch. Let me get us back on track. We obviously spoken a little bit about the accident. I'm a little bit curious. How many missions did you complete on the Britannic?
Well, I've been diving it now. I think I was 6 or, well, if I count the Trident submarines, I believe 7 expeditions to Britannic, of which 4 of them were diving expeditions. The other 3 were just in submersibles. And let me tell you, there's something exceptionally cool. It's not diving, it's different. But to go down in the Triton submarine and be able to spend 6 or 8 hours going around the entire wreck. Now, it's not diving. It's something different.
It's different, yeah.
But it's awesome. It is incredibly awesome.
I can totally understand how excited you are about that, because I felt the same transition when I went from open circuit to closed circuit on wreck diving, because where you would usually take a big wreck and you would do 4 dives in a day to see something for a certain amount of time. Now you jump in once on the rebreather and you do the whole thing in one go. And it made, for me, doing the whole thing in one, it enhances the experience so much better. So taking it to the next level like that, I can't imagine. It must have been fantastic.
No, and that particular photograph, that's Evan and I on an Explorers Club mission down there. That was for the 100-year anniversary. So we were diving Britannic on the 100-year anniversary of her sinking.
Yikes.
Wow. Incredible. Yeah.
Incredible. So out of the trilogy, which one is your favorite, and which one would you most like to visit again, I guess?
Oh, you know what? Honestly, it's always going to be Britannic, because I'm a diver, and I'm never done. There's so many different wrecks that I've been to, that I've explored, and I'm never done. There's no wreck that you can say, well, I've seen everything. Shipwrecks age like people, and in that, sometimes they show a whole different side of them. Case in point. When I was a kid in 1985, the concept of going into the engine room on the Andrea Doria was insane. But now, because all the other decks have fallen away, access to the engine room is a lot easier. So my point is that you could look at it and say that there's loss, but then again, maybe there's opportunity.
Absolutely.
So going back to Britannic as a scuba diver, hoping that the Greek government will relent and allow more interior exploration is really important to me. I think it's important to a lot of other wreck divers that want to have the opportunity to go inside and swim around Titanic's tragic sister.
Absolutely. We have a couple of more questions before we wrap it all up. But before we dive into that, it maybe be good to bring Vic back because the questions just keep rolling in. So
sure,
maybe pick 2 or 3, and then we carry on to the finish line. So Vic, what do you got for us?
Hey guys, cool. Timothy Scott, he's curious. Sorry, wrong page. So Rick's asking, do you still dive an inspiration, Richie?
I dive a number of different rebreathers. Currently, I'm diving a JJ. I'm keeping up with the modern technology, but I still own an Evolution rebreather as well. So.
No longer a Luddite, eh? Dylan Williams is asking you to break out the jacket, your Atlantic Wreck Divers jacket.
It's actually on the door behind me.
There you go.
And Rachel Parker's asking, what is next for Richie Kohler?
Well, that's a great question. 2 things. We're in negotiations with Netflix for the release of the movie, or possibly even a series based on shadow divers. So that's very exciting because that will give me an opportunity to work as a consultant and associate producer on that project, which should be quite interesting. I'm also supposed to be working later on this year with an incredibly talented female diver on a project for Discovery, which I'm not at liberty to tell you who or what the project is yet, but I can tell you that it's really, really exciting. I cannot wait to work with her. And I think it's really going to be an incredible project. So we got a Discovery project going, Netflix is in negotiation, and I think this pandemic is winding down. So things are looking good, guys.
Yeah, optimism.
Very exciting. Cheers, Richie.
Nice. Thanks, Vic. All right, let's run to the finish line here. So Richie, you're a keen fan of wreck preservation. What do you think about modern technology like photogrammetry, for example?
Well, I think they're incredible tools that help everyone. And when you say wreck preservation, realize that I've made quite a career, if you will, as a person who's recovered artifacts, not only for myself, but also for museums, to solve mysteries. In other words, there would have been no way of solving the mystery of U-869 if we did not physically recover a tag that positively proved its identity. Mm-hmm. And the only way to do that was to go inside. So my point was we had to bend the rules, if you will, and then once we were done, then the rules had to come back into play. The reason why I say that is because I do always want to operate within the letter of the law. Whatever the laws are, wherever you're going, you have to play by the rules. If there's shipwrecks are protected, well, then you can't touch them. If it's shipwrecks that you can legally salvage, well, then God bless you, go for it, knock yourself out. Mm-hmm. You got to work within the constraints of the law. To that end, using new technology like photogrammetry is a way of us providing the next generation of people the tools they will need to go even further. I mean, think about it. I mean, I was a little kid watching Jacques Cousteau, The Silent World on television, you know, and then somehow in a crazy world, I wind up making television, and somehow people tell me that I've influenced them. So that's a really great honor that I have to be a positive influence to people. So with photogrammetry, we can show people who may have no desire at all to dive to the bottom of the Black Sea, let's say, okay? Yeah. But now we can show them these wrecks. We can tell those stories. So if we look at what Rich Lundgren and his team have been doing on the Mars, that is incredible. It's incredible. It's like something out of science fiction, but it's real.
It's real, yeah, absolutely. And the story behind that is very, very amazing. To summarize, I mean, we only had like 5-10 minutes to talk about the Titanic, for God's sake. But we are wrapping up the show. So looking back at 40 years of shipwreck diving, how do you think wreck diving has changed your life when you look back?
Well, the first thing is the people. I have friends that I've made diving that truly we come from different countries, different states, different walks of life, different economic, different political, religious backgrounds. What an incredible, diverse piece of the world that we get as wreck divers, where our commonality is simply the fact that we love diving in history. You know, even in that, some people come to the shipwrecks because they want to take pictures. Some come because they just want to grab a lobster, on and on and on. Their motivations may be different, but we have the commonality of our appreciation of shipwrecks. So for me, it's always first and foremost has been the people that have come into my life and that have enriched my life. The second is opportunity. I mean, when people tell me that I'm lucky, oh, you're lucky. To a small degree, there is a little bit of luck. Life is a matter of luck. But you've got to be in it. You've got to pursue it. Be in it. You've got, exactly. You can't not go diving and then complain about, oh, I should have been there. But yes, you should have been there. You should have went diving.
Now go.
You know, it's like, exactly. So you've got to put yourself into the game.
Yeah.
And you've got to give it your all. If you're given an opportunity, and I think, you know, if you really look at some of the events in my life that you discussed, each one of these was an opportunity that somebody else may have said, oh, I don't know, I don't want to, I can't afford it. You know, case in point was like with the U-869. There was no guarantee of anything. There was no Hitler's Lost Sub. There was no shadow divers. There was only doing the right thing. The concept of going to Germany and telling people, you do the right thing, you do things the right way, people notice. And that, my friends, is the story. That is where you get your recognition, because you just do the right thing and treat people the right way.
And that leads me to my last question, and a little shout out.
You're like the cat in the hat. You just keep pulling questions out of this hat. It's a never-ending hat of questions.
I know, it's the last one, I promise. And a little shout out to our buddy Perry, because it leads into, what advice would you give young divers interested in wreck diving, other than what you explained already?
Well, I first off, I love Perry. I met him down at Horizon Divers. I think it was last year.
Yeah, he was in truck with us in December.
What a great young man, great kid. Getting on his rebreather. Yeah, there he is with Katie. Yep. Great guy. My advice to him and to any young person getting into wreck diving is, if you had told me 25 years ago that I would have the opportunity to do the things we're doing today, to go to the depths that we are, things like photogrammetry, closed circuit rebreathers, even affordable, and I understand they're multi-million dollars, but the concept that people can privately own submarines that go to 3,000 feet is just incredible. And it's going to get even better as time goes by. These young generation of divers like Perry and the people with him and behind him have incredible opportunities ahead of them to go even further. And so, like I said earlier, you've got to be in it, you've got to be diving, you've got to get out there, and you've got to look, because you're never gonna find, new horizons if you don't leave the shore.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you so much, Richie. I don't know, are you in the mood for a couple of more audience questions, or should we leave it?
No, go ahead. Let's do it.
Hi, Vic. Because there's so many of them rolling in. We might as well do a couple.
Not anymore.
Thank you.
Hello. Right. So Marion is asking, do you still tech dive, or do you mainly enjoy exploring the deep wrecks through the glass of deep sea vehicles?
I do tech dive. I also go diving in the local rivers here for bottles, or go in 30 or 10 meters of water for lobsters here, and scalp diving. Some of my favorite diving, believe it or not, is just to go out with friends, go grab some lobsters and scallops, come back up, have a couple of beers, and have a barbecue. I mean, what better way to combine all the things that you love in your life? Good diving, good eating, good friends. And then as for going technical and deep diving, yeah, my aspiration is to continue to locate new shipwrecks, and when it's appropriate and lawful, recover artifacts from shipwrecks, from lost ships. I just, find that Indiana Jones eat your heart out moment to be one of the driving forces of my life. And also working for television and getting the opportunity to work with, incredible people and talented teams like the people at U-Boat Malta, at U Group, to work with Dr. Bob Ballard, to work with some of the folks over at Woods Hole. These are incredible opportunities, and whatever the tool is that we need to use for the job, I'm going to use.
Great. Well, we've got a question from Aaron's dad here.
What? Okay. Hey, Dad.
Sorry, just bear with me.
Aaron, you left the garage open, and the cat got out.
All right, Dad. It had to happen. It's live TV.
Dad's sending love.
Oh, thanks, Dad. All right.
Richie, we've had one question that's asked throughout the night. What is your most favorite wreck to dive, and also your least? That's come up a few times tonight.
Ooh, I get asked that question a lot, and my cliche kind of hippie answer is the next one. Whatever the next wreck is a great one. But I would honestly say that off the east coast of Long Island, here in the northeast part of the United States where I live, is a passenger liner that sank in collision in the late 1800s called the Oregon. And the Oregon is only 130 feet deep, so it's a sport dive. It's not incredibly technical. It's not a very, very deep dive. But it's deep enough so that the wreck is in pretty good condition for a shipwreck that's over 100 years old. On that shipwreck, you can recover beautiful bits of pottery. It is in international water, so you can recover crockery, pottery, cargo. She was bringing immigrants to America when she sank. Some divers have found bits and pieces of gold. And if it wasn't just artifacts, it's a beautiful dive visually to see. And of course, as I always and often do dive for my stomach, you can always get lobsters and scallops. So it combines all of this great stuff. You want to do video or still photography, you've got that. Artifacts, food diving. So the Oregon is Richie Kohler's #1 shipwreck that I want to go to. That's it right there.
Seal of approval right there.
Some recommendation.
Okay, yeah, and those who know. Okay. Now, the least favorite dive, I can't, even wrecks where there's been tragedy, that you can't blame the wreck. You can't blame, that. I can't say that I have a least favorite wreck. I mean, okay, here's an example of a least favorite wreck that we went out to a wreck that was known on the charts called the Tip of the Canyon. We built this up in our mind that it was this wreck or that wreck. It's going to be a passenger line. It's going to be awesome. Yeah. We dive down. We get all the way down to the bottom. And it's a barge. It's a barge carrying pipe. It's like, no. So that's the one. Thumbs down.
Thumbs down.
Thumbs down.
Massive thumbs down.
Cool. Thanks, Richie. Cheers, guys.
No problem.
All right, Richie, I've taken 90 minutes of your time, brother. I think it's time to wrap this one up. But I want to take the opportunity to thank you so much for coming clean with the Dirty Dozen. It's just good to see you. I'm glad you're staying healthy and out there, and I'm looking forward to our trip to Bikini Atoll on the 1st of August.
Yeah, man. Me too. Hey, my understanding is that we may actually have an opportunity for somebody who wants to go to join us. Is that correct?
I think there's going to be a spot or two open. So if somebody wants to join us, just get in touch with me. Go on the website, write an inquiry, and you have a chance to join both of us in bikini. So nice one, guys.
All right. Thank you again, man.
Yeah, it was good seeing you, brother. See you soon.
All righty, buddy. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Okay, so that was our interview with Richie Kohler. Remember, if you missed a little bit of this episode, we have all the previous episodes in the series. This is episode number 5. And this one will be online on YouTube tomorrow on our YouTube channel. Just search the 30 Dozen Expeditions and you'll find us. Remember to click the subscribe button and the notification bell and whatever these YouTubers say to plug their channel. Anyway, I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Coming Clean with the Dirty Dozen, and join us on Monday for an interview with Stephen Whelan and Mark Evans, 2 dear friends of ours, where we'll talk about 25 years of dive media. And like I said, it's on Monday the 4th on 7 p.m. GMT. I'm your host, Aron Arngrimsson. Stay safe in these wild times. Take care of yourself and each other. And if you feel lonely, we are here to chat dirty. See you later, guys.